your podcast app. You'll see there's a discourse happening. Is this book a masterpiece or problematic? One's a lifelong diehard fan, the other's a first-time reader. Both are really smart and funny and attractive. Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley High. Titans and hierarchy. Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley High. Relentless focus on their bodies. Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley High. What do they mean by all American? Sweet Valley, Sweet Valley High. No sex, just iteration.
Welcome to Sweet Valley Hive. Today we are covering Sweet Valley High number 6, Dangerous Love.
Terrifying. Truly terrifying. Let's get dangerous, Pardo. Let's
get dangerous.
Dangerous. I mean, I've got the cliffhanger up.
Yep.
Basically, they're at the end of the surf competition. Elizabeth pushed her nagging concern to the back of her mind, letting the sensation of Todd's kisses spread outward from her center like ripples on a pond. She knew she would have to tell him sooner or later. Her parents had forbidden, absolutely forbidden, either Jessica or herself to ride on a motorcycle. Elizabeth certainly understood why. A while back, one of their cousins had been killed riding a motorcycle. She still remembered how upset their mom had been over it. If she knew Elizabeth was even contemplating getting on one of those things, Elizabeth shuddered to think of the consequences. And yet, how would Todd take it when she refused to share what was obviously going to be a major part of his life from now on? It was sure to put a dent in their closeness, she realized with a sick feeling of dread. "I'll bet you look cute in a crash helmet," Todd murmured as he twirled a lock of her hair about his finger. "Maybe I'll get you one in bright blue." And listener, please know that I'm avoiding doing a very gay affectation for Todd's voice because I thought about doing that, I thought it might be homophobic, so I'm not, but I want to be.
I actually think it's okay. And I am the judge and jury of that.
Elizabeth killed any further conversation on the subject by winding her arms around his neck.
Killed.
And kissing him with such fervor that he fell backward onto the sand like a corpse. Though like a corpse was added, but still. "Tomorrow," she promised herself, stifling the tiny stitch of fear in the pit of her stomach. "I'll tell him tomorrow." Will Todd's motorcycle drive them apart? Find out in Sweet Valley High 6, Dangerous Love. Wow. Anything you want to say about the cliffhanger before you show me that couvert? Oh.
Wait, this is your first time seeing it?
Oh my God.
No.
Yes.
Wait, I thought... Okay, so usually I have texted it to Robert beforehand.
Yes.
I assumed you Googled it. Oh my God.
No.
Okay, describe what you're seeing. Describe what you're seeing.
Oh my. Okay. I do not want listeners to Google this. I want you to let me take you on a trip. So we have Elizabeth Wakefield, hair blowing in the wind, clutching on to Todd. Todd's hands are on the handlebars of a motorcycle. He is wearing a skin-tight blue polo shirt that is showing off his long, lean. He's so lean arms. Like he looks hot. I'm just going to say it. I haven't even seen it. His face actually doesn't look great. His hair is also blowing in the wind. He's got a full face of makeup on, as all of the men of Sweet Valley do at all times. Just like blush, eyeshadow, a little bit of lip gloss, not stick. But I mean, he looks great. He's got a kind of mischievous but lovely glint in his eye. But the main thing about this cover, there are two things. One is Elizabeth's face, and the other is Elizabeth's hands. Elizabeth's face is stretched and contorted. Her mouth is wide open as if she is screaming. Her eyes are dead. Blank. Nothing behind them. She looks terrified. I mean, this was like an Alfred Hitchcock film poster.
Yeah, it really does look. It looks like, like the birds or something.
It is. She looks like she's being attacked by birds. One of her hands, and I don't blame her for this, is clutching Todd's sinewy bicep, his lean bicep. Her other hand is wrapped around the back of his neck and is clutching his pectoral muscle.
Ooh, isn't that an interesting inversion of when Bruce's arm was around Jessica's neck?
Yes. There is such tension. There is such drama. There is such terror. I know you say you can't judge a book by its cover. This book judged by this cover, baby.
Yeah, also, he does not have his eyes on the road.
Oh, great point.
And what I get from that is that he's sort of looking into the distance in a way. You know, we've talked previously about kind of drag and people being sort of posing and kind of imitating, you know,
Of course.
people from, you know, media icons and stuff like that.
Oh my God, yes.
And we'll get to the absolutely delicious description of when he first shows up with it and kind of how sexy he looks and how exciting it is for everyone who's watching him. But he's doing some posing here, I think.
Yeah,
is what
he's doing James Dean drag.
Yeah.
And interesting, it's funny that you point that out because he is definitely evoking James Dean. She, for me, feels a little like Sandy from Grease. Like she looks like a good girl gone bad.
Yeah, totally. Especially because she's wearing one of her characteristic button-up short sleeve wheat colored.
Wheat colored. I was hoping you'd say wheat colored.
And I think the other thing is that he is flexing. So his muscle, like in the arm that she's grabbing, the muscle is flexed. And so I think what we're also getting from that is there's this sort of mutually, there's stimulation, there's posing, there's a thrill and a danger, and it's all kind of, it's making them both very excited. So, whew. And neither of them wearing helmets, by the way. I'll tell you that the kind of sub thing on the front is, are Elizabeth and Todd heading for disaster? And the sub thing on the back is the end of the road for Todd and Elizabeth.
What I like about that and the way that the cliffhanger sets it up and the way the book sets it sets it up as if the worst thing that could possibly happen is Todd and Elizabeth breaking up. That's a disaster. The end of the road. It's going to be awful. And so you're just kind of reading along, and she gives you a couple, and we're not into this yet, but she gives you a couple of moments. You're like, oh my gosh, maybe they break up. That would be the worst thing. And then you get to what actually happens, and you're like, oh shit. This this is worse than the worst thing. Cool.
Yeah, so what's interesting about this is how well I think it has to be ambiguous. So Dangerous Love is an ambiguous title. Are they heading for disaster is ambiguous. The end of the road. Will Todd's new bike drive them apart? It's all of these questions and intimations about the problem that this bike, and it reminds me kind of Discord's Apple. Just kidding. But the type of disaster it may lead to is very, very ambiguous. And it kind of reminds me of the storm clouds moving in and the shipwreck that happened. But the framing of it is sort of inevitable in the sense that they're heading for disaster. That's just what's happening. One of the things for me about the title Dangerous Love is like it positions the danger within the love and not within... It's like, what is actually dangerous? The threat. Yeah. So we'll get into that. But I think, there's a lot of really nice ambiguities all over that.
You read that in a very generous way. My notes about the title were like, this title makes no sense.
Oh, I really like it.
I know. You're reading it much more. You're a more generous and thoughtful and kind reader than I am. I was like, no one's love is... the love is not dangerous.
Yeah.
Do we want to just kind of give our listeners an overview of the plot? Would you like me to start or would you like you to start?
You can start.
Great. Well, I got it easy. Todd gets a motorcycle.
Of course, the Wakefields have this family rule taken very seriously that motorcycles are forbidden because cousin Rexy a few years ago died in one. Beloved cousin Rexy.
Elizabeth doesn't want to tell Todd about her fears around the motorcycle and the family's edict that she can't ride a motorcycle because she assumes that Todd will dump her, and for other reasons that we'll get into outside of the plot summary.
She doesn't tell him about the rule, and she keeps sort of finding these ways to avoid it. She eventually tells him, and he's like, okay, that's fine.
And then Enid is having a big party, and Todd is showing up very, very late for it.
Elizabeth is stuck at the party because Jessica was supposed to give her a lift, but ended up getting distracted when Jessica was on her date with her new beau, Danny Stouffer.
It's not Danny. It's Enid's cousin Brian. She ditches Danny.
Oh my God,
This is not. That's not the point, though. So Todd finally shows up and says, "Liz, I love you, and I've had some realizations. I'm selling the bike."
Liz is so relieved and has this sort of feeling of like, everything's good with me and Todd, and she feels sort of suddenly kind of more relaxed about all of it. And then Enid's mother's like, well, I guess Jessica didn't come. I can't take you to the after party. Do you want me to call you a cab?
And Elizabeth is like, "I trust you. This is totally fine. I'm going to get on the back of the bike with you. It'll be quick. It'll be fine."
Unfortunately, Todd has already sold the pink helmet that he had gotten for her. So there's only one helmet to wear, and Todd puts it on himself.
The next thing we know, Jessica is heading with Brian back to pick Elizabeth up, and she cannot get through. The car cannot get through because there's flashing lights and ambulances everywhere.
There is a collision. Todd emerges unscathed. Elizabeth.
Say it.
Well,
Say it.
I'm actually forgetting where exactly it ends, what they tell us. I just want to make sure I don't spoil. Sorry.
Oh, she's in a coma.
Elizabeth is in a coma.
It's so funny, but one of my favorite parts of this is when your like encyclopedic knowledge bites you in the butt. So that's where we end. Elizabeth's in a coma.
Yeah, so TBD on Elizabeth.
Although, let's be real, the books continue for another 100 and something, so, you know. I mean, I bought a 12-pack. This is only book 6. Although I guess maybe the rest of the books are like Jessica mourning Elizabeth and learning how to love again.
In our really eloquent plot summary that we just did, we talked about the plot of the motorcycle stuff. We talked about a little bit, Enid has her Sweet 16, and we've gotten some more insight into the character of Enid, certainly, that I think we'll want to cover. Definitely want to talk about Jessica and Danny Stouffer and then Enid's cousin. But what I think is the biggest plot point, and really is the main thing here, is the Dairi Burger has had a renovation.
God, I knew.
The Dairi Burger has had a renovation, and the most important character of the series, Clam Surprise, was introduced finally in this.
I can't believe they held off until book 6 to get us the clams.
So we'll talk about Clam Surprise later, but take it away.
The first paragraph doesn't do so much for me, but maybe, sorry. "I still can't believe you got permission to take the spider to school today," Jessica Wakefield said, opening the passenger side of the red Fiat convertible. "How'd you do it?" Because that's the first paragraph.
Yeah, first paragraph,
not rich.
Not too much to say. And we're wondering, wait a minute, it's already first paragraph and I haven't even heard about a mirror? I haven't seen Jessica look in her reflection yet. What is happening? I'm absolutely disoriented, falling off my chair.
Where's the description of their bodies? What do they look like? I don't remember if they have model-sized figures or not.
Don't worry, it's coming.
I told Mom it was a special occasion, her twin sister Elizabeth stammered, sliding in behind the wheel. Jessica turned the rearview mirror to her side and checked her makeup. She had run late this morning and had dashed out of the Wakefield split-level house without performing her usual ritual before the bathroom mirror. Not that she really needed it. Tan, blonde, with a model-sized waist and a clear, satin-smooth complexion. Both she and her identical twin were among the best-looking students at Sweet Valley High. So yes, we've got mirror, we've got looks. I didn't realize on first read, the fact that they call it a split-level house is really funny. Like, that's a detail the readers need. What's her home look like? It's split-level.
That is a very common thing they like to say about the split-level home. They talk about the split-level home, they talk about the Spanish tiled kitchen, and I think sometimes they talk about the stucco roof. But the split-level is mentioned a lot. Just a technical sort of detail is that when we hear about Jessica looking in the mirror in the car, the rear view mirror, like I was confused because I thought rear view mirror meant the one that's on her side outside of the car. But that's not what it is. She turned the rear view mirror to her side. It's the one in the middle above them, because then later Elizabeth turns it back.
Right.
But what I thought was kind of interesting about that moment is that within the first kind of page and a half, we have an example of Elizabeth exhibiting like driving safety, and that's actually an action that she does. Is like Jessica moving the mirror is a risk that could put you to get in a collision. Elizabeth turns the mirror back, so really almost kind of a one Bruce one sort of broken palindrome type of bookend here of the driving safety behavior that she's doing at the beginning versus the end.
Oh, I love that. I was thinking the whole like eyes not on the road thing that you mentioned of the cover. I'm just trying to. We're gonna have to get there when we get there. But the idea that she does eventually get back on the back of the bike felt so kind of confusing to me. But we'll get there when we get there. We still have a huge renovation to talk about.
Yeah, Liz's psychology in this one was more confusing to me. Like in the past few books, I've had very strong opinions about what's going on psychologically of like, okay, this is happening and they're using Robin to fight out their own thing because she's worried about being good. And then in this one, she feels like she has to do that. And then this one, she tells herself this fake thing and it's like Shakespeare. With this one, what's actually going on with Elizabeth and the motorcycle and Todd and what does she really want and what's going on here, it was a lot blurrier for me and it changed. And anyway, we can get into that. Would this be the time for me to share some very brief relevant information about the Yamaha Virago?
Yes, please.
The Yamaha Virago was Yamaha's first V twin cruiser motorcycle.
Oh my God. Sorry. I was just like, okay, that's a fact. Holy crap.
No, I got excited about that, but then I looked up, okay, is a V twin, is a twin something interesting? And it's just, I couldn't do anything with this. It's just a certain kind of engine with a 2-cylinder piston engine where the cylinders share a common crankshaft and are arranged. I couldn't go there. It's a certain kind of engine, okay, whatever. But the root of the word virago is vir, meaning a man in Latin. But suffixing it with ago, the word gets woman characteristics. New meaning is a tomboy, a rough woman, a woman with masculine characteristics. The primary Latin word virago had a meaning, a woman warrior. In that time, this had a good connotation. Later, this word got a negative connotation, unpleasant, violent, anger and wicked woman, capable of doing evil or dishonest acts. The most famous virago in English literature is Kate from Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew.
I had not thought, I did not know the meaning of the word virago. I, of course, listeners probably can infer that I've taken about 7 years of Latin through my schooling. So the vir, the manliness of it did come through. I didn't realize the kind of blurring of lines between man and woman. That, I think, is meaningful, not in actually the way that they intend, but throughout the whole book, I've been like, wait, what is the motorcycle a metaphor for? Like, what's going on with the motorcycle? And I think, I'm sure you got to where I got, I don't know. But for me, like, the motorcycle is a metaphor for sex. And like virago, the like merging of man and woman in heterosexual sexual encounters. There's something there for me, like the blending of man and woman.
Sorry, I just gotta fill my water.
I assume this is getting cut, but if it's not getting cut, hi listeners, it's nice to have this private moment with you. On my own. Oh, she's back. Oh, no. We're just doing that. No, we're good. Okay. The first chapter is basically Elizabeth reveals to Jessica that she's lying to Todd because she doesn't want to ride on the back of his bike.
A couple of moments that I just marked that where I was sort of trying to work through the psychology rationale that she's saying for this. So she says, he doesn't know. And Jessica says, what do you mean? I didn't tell him yet. He thinks I'm as excited about the bike as he is. Jessica says, how could you? Elizabeth says, I have no intention of ever riding on that motorcycle. And I hate the thought of Todd on it too. But how could I tell him that? He's been fantasizing about this bike for years. I couldn't bear the thought of shattering his dream. That feels like the first articulation of this narrative she has, which is that like her not being able to ride the bike is somehow prohibitive for him or is somehow like a massive problem for him to where it would shatter his dream.
This to me felt really mature and believable because I think, that is what happens. She says, I don't want to ride on the back of this motorcycle. And then at the end of the book, he's like, I'm selling the motorcycle. I'm giving up on my dreams.
But he didn't have to do that. And he should.
No, but she knows him well enough to know that he would. In my mind. My reading of this was like, oh my God, she's so mature because she realizes that it's not just her saying, I don't want to do this. Her saying, I don't want to do this will really impact him.
Okay, I hear that, but it wasn't just that she couldn't ride it that made him sell it, is that it caused those other bump in their relationship because of the jealousy that she then had. Remember? Because like,
Yes, of course.
right? So like what happens is, okay, and I gotta just talk at this point about the pacing of the book. Similar to the last book where it was like what it seems like is the plot is kind of over in the first third. So what happens in this one is it's set up as like she has all these things she's not telling him. And you kind of think, okay, she's going to hide it from him for a while, and that's going to be the whole misunderstandings, and then they're going to resolve it. But she actually ends up telling him pretty quickly the truth of, hey, my parents have this rule, and he's responds very reasonably, which is like, yeah, I'm disappointed. I kind of wish you would have told me earlier. I understand why you didn't. I would love if you could give me a chance to actually talk to your parents about it and talk to them about some of the safety stuff and how responsible I am, and maybe they would reconsider. And she's like, yeah, okay. But he's like, yeah, but don't worry about it, basically. And so that ends up not being the actual problem in terms of their relationship. What ends up then happening, though, is that she starts seeing other girls on the bike. But even that then doesn't become the problem throughout the whole book of like the jealousy of the other girls and that being the thing that's going to motivate her to ultimately get on the bike. They resolve the jealousy issue. She tells him and he tells her, oh, I've been feeling jealous. And they have this oh haha moment at the Dairi Burger, I think, where they're like, oh, isn't it silly to be jealous? And I feel so normal and we're great. And actually, don't worry about it. You could have Mandy on your bike. And he's like, no, but I won't. I'm not going to have girls on my bike anymore. And I'm like, oh, I thought that was going to be the sort of, if the tension isn't that she's keeping the secret, and then the tension isn't that the jealousy of the other girls, they resolve that. But so what I thought was interesting about that is it means there isn't really a reason for her to get on the bike. You know,
right.
In terms, not that those are good reasons or whatever, but like if she was jealous and that spiked it, or if it was, you know what I'm saying? But it was like nothing spiked it, which is actually kind of interesting that she ends up getting on there just kind of for no reason.
Is this the time to get into the motorcycle as metaphor for sex?
Go for it.
The whole time I'm like, I can tell this motorcycle is about something. What is it about? And then like what you just said, like this idea that Todd wants to talk to her parents about how safe and responsible he is. This idea that Elizabeth literally at one point says like, well, if I don't ride on the back of the motorcycle with him, he'll find some girlfriend who will. For me, felt so much like a high school moment where it's like, my boyfriend wants to have sex. I don't want to have sex. If I don't put out, someone else is going to put out for him. For me, this was like, oh, this is just a metaphor for like, are we going to bone or not? And what does that mean for our relationship? And at the end, Todd is like, oh no, we're not going to bone. And Elizabeth is finally like, no, I do want to have sex with you. I'm ready. And then she gets a coma, which like the same way that they probably handle like giving her an STI, getting her pregnant, etc. But did you get any of those vibes, or am I making that up entirely?
I got the vibes when they kept talking about like 300 pounds between your legs and you straddle it and I freaking make it my little bitch. But one thing that may support that too is, and this is small, but it was interesting. Early on, it's page 3 for me. We find out that Jessica's recovering from a case of poison oak. And so we don't see, are you making a face because you don't, because what?
I don't remember that at all.
Yeah, because it's like one line.
Oh, Jessica groaned as she put away her comb and reached for her lipstick. Please don't remind me, she said, the memory of the case of poison oak that had kept her home still fresh in her mind.
So that's just one line, right? And
yeah.
And in the previous book, we didn't see her having poison oak. So it's never, the poison oak isn't depicted, right? But what is the poison oak? She got that in the woods with Scott. So we see here the poison oak. She's being punished, right? And that to me just felt so cruel of like, didn't she go through enough in the last book? Like, wasn't she punished enough? She slept on the cold floor. She survived this attack. She never even got to talk to anyone about it and all of this. And she finally gets home and now she has to have poison oak. It just felt like so mean. And so that's kind of maybe if we think about the kind of sexual metaphors, that's kind of an interesting analog of Elizabeth and Todd's ultimate thing. So
definitely. I love that. That is such a good note. I did not get that.
Can I talk about Jessica and Danny Stouffer?
Yeah, sure. You're really into this Jessica Danny business.
So the book starts off, Jessica's dating this new guy, Danny Stouffer. Seems like a nice guy. She's kind of casually dating him.
He drives a Trans Am, is that correct?
Yes, Robert, thank you so much. He drives a Trans Am. We talked, of course, in detail last time about the Pontiac Firebird.
Of course.
We talked about Smokey and the Bandit. Specifically, the car in Smokey and the Bandit is a Trans Am. So what's the difference between a Trans Am and a Firebird? The Trans Am was a particular packaged version of the Firebird that had certain features and certain visual changes. It ended up becoming its own like model, and like selling huge and everything else, but it's basically like a rectangle and a square. So we had Scott driving the red Firebird, and we have Danny driving a red Trans Am. And what I think about Danny is that I think he's Scott light. I think Jessica is trying, because he's sort of safe Scott. He's a nice guy. But what happens? She's dating Danny, and then they're outside the Dairi Burger, and Danny accidentally bumps the purple van of a character that we're introduced to here called Jerry Crunch McAllister, who is a resident dropout bad boy. And Danny gets into this conflict with Crunch McAllister because Crunch, of course, has road rage and starts yelling at him that he... and Danny is sort of timid and not fighting back. And this is a turnoff for Jessica. So what ends up turning her off of Danny is that he doesn't have the aggression. He doesn't have the violence, right? That's what ends up making her not attracted to him. And then later in the book, we get this moment where Jessica says, she's talking about Danny. She goes, "I'll admit I wasn't wild about the way he handled himself with Crunch, but I suppose even Bruce Patman wouldn't have done well against that big brute. Listen, did I tell you that Lila told me Bruce has been asking about me again?" Detecting a note of excitement in Jessica's voice, Elizabeth said worriedly, "I didn't know you cared." "Oh, I don't, Liz. I just find it very amusing." So that's really telling for me, right? So she went from Bruce, who was this sort of mind games, mostly was his thing of control. Then she went to Scott Daniels, who was like really rapey. Then she went to Danny, who's sort of gentle, but same sort of aesthetics as Scott. She got turned off by him because he's too soft. And now she's excited about Bruce again. So I thought Danny was interesting in the way that we're seeing Jessica's trajectory move along. And, you know, again, we had talked about kind of Pascal's gun and how sometimes we see these small things that don't necessarily get followed up on right away. But I thought these details about Danny and then what she says about Bruce was really, really beautiful, small moments to show us that this is a really complex thing with her that she is not out of.
Just for the listeners at home, A, that is brilliant analysis, and that's probably very true. B, that is like maybe the D or E plot, I feel like. I feel like Jessica's love stuff is like not like the casual, beautiful reader who's just trying to like finish this book so that they can record a podcast might not even have the time to realize like, oh, I guess maybe Stouffer was like kind of a casual boyfriend until she moved on to Enid's cousin.
Yeah, again about the sort of what's going on with Liz and the bike. On the next page when she says, "Look, Jess, Todd's bike is something I'm going to have to accept." And Jess says, "And ride with him?" "Of course not," Elizabeth exclaimed. "One has nothing to do with the other." Right? So there she's saying, it doesn't mean I have to ride with him if he has it. And Jessica says, "Oh no, don't be a fool. Look at the reality. That bike has a back seat. What are you going to tell him when he asks you to ride?" So Elizabeth says one has nothing to do with the other. My first instinct was she wants this. And maybe I've just gotten so used to... Like, my first instinct was she wants this thrill. Can we go to where he describes it to... Where he describes what it's like? Elizabeth tells Todd the truth. He says, "Don't worry about it." She says, "You think I'm missing out on something really special, huh?" "I know you are. When the weather's warm and sunny like it is today, believe me, there's no better way to travel. I could take you into the hills and you'd feel the wind wrapping around you. You'd be able to look around and see the trees, the birds, even the road in a way you've never before. You'd actually be part of the scenery, not just watching it. It's the kind of experience you can never get when you're cooped up in a car." Todd's brown eyes were sparkling with excitement.
They're talking about fucking. You feel so cooped up and caged in, and you get the chance to really let yourself go and become part of the universe. I could take you places you've never been before. You would feel nature like you've never felt nature before. Your point that you made so brilliantly, you left a tiny bit on the table. She like baits him into, like she basically says, "Convince me. You think I'm missing out on something really special, huh?" Is the gloss of that is, what's so great about this? Convince me that it's great.
It's like an All Night Long when on the first page when Jessica says, "Do I look sophisticated enough for Scott?" And Elizabeth's like, "How are you going to convince Mom, huh? She's not blind, you know. She has eyes. She's going to see you." That's Elizabeth saying, "Can I help you with this plot? Is there a way that you might need me?" Yeah.
Exactly. But
then,
this is, I mean, and I want to be clear on this podcast and in our real lives, we are not victim blamers. Elizabeth is not at fault for her coma. It is not her fault. But it does feel like she's asking for it here. That's what I'm going to say.
All right, we need to get to the Dairi Burger renovation. So,
oh my God. First up, just for listeners, just so you know, I'm sure you already know, Dairi is Dairi. Make of that what you will. The Daugherty brothers had outdone themselves, she thought, impressed by the way the restaurant owners had turned the popular, though somewhat shabby-looking hangout into a respectable restaurant. The most visible improvement was the replacement of the dingy, white-tiled exterior with natural wood planking. The neon sign atop the roof, which used to read DRIURGE, was gone too, and in its place was a brown plastic sign with the words spelled out in yellow script letters. The inside had a completely new style as well, redone, and the wood and plants looked so popular with many of the area's eateries. Elizabeth didn't think the plants had a chance of lasting more than a week, death, but she felt that the new wooden booths and tables were a welcome replacement for the old cracked red vinyl and formica covered with the graffiti of close to a generation of Sweet Valley students.
When I first read this, I was like, why? Why is this happening, this Dairi Burger renovation? Just like from the perspective of story, like why do they need this? What does it do? And I think what it shows kind of interestingly is, you know, we have talked previously about kind of liminal spaces and the childhood and adolescence, and they're here and they're not. And the gentrification of the Dairi Burger and the fact that Elizabeth still knows the plants are going to die, right? The Dairi Burger is still across the street from the Shady Lady. The Dairi Burger is still situated in a little bit of a gray area in terms of class part of town. And so, you know, instead of having graffiti and formica, now they have wood and plants, apparently a popular look. Now it looks quote unquote respectable. They've put the letters back in the sign and so on. So I think it's interesting because on the one hand, the Dairi Burger is sort of like very like 1950s, I don't know, idyllic, suburban, like kids diner kind of thing where they're like having good, clean fun and drinking milkshakes. And it's like, it is that, but it isn't. It's also adjacent to these other types of places, which means that these other sort of social types of people it's also sort of porous in that way. And so you may see a Crunch McAllister in the parking lot. You may get an interaction or a scuffle between a Bruce and this one and that one.
I love that. I also just want to call our attention to Dairi Burger, the old sign is flickering, is gone. What remains? Urge.
Well, no, DRI, urge.
Urge. I mean, urges, desires, wants. And you can paper them over. You can put a new sign up there. You can change out that formica for vinyl. You can have wooden plants. But the urges remain.
I do want to say, and this may be an overread, but the Dairi Burger now has a takeout counter. And you will... Something I have noticed in future books is that this broadens the range of the types of interactions people can have with each other, because sometimes people will be sitting at, you'll see in later books, now that there's a takeout counter, sometimes someone might come in, but they're social pariah. So what do? They don't sit at the booth, they just get their takeout and they run out in shame with a paper bag. That happens a lot in the future books. So I think the takeout counter also sort of enabled that. I want to get to the first scene of Todd being hot coming off the bike.
She had to tell him she couldn't take a ride with him. It was going to be difficult. If possible, Todd was even more attractive than ever that morning, cutting a sexy, self-assured pose astride his shiny black bike. He was wearing a soft leather jacket, which hugged his long, trim body, and a black, full-faced helmet, which he now took off to reveal his tousled head of dark brown hair, and the biggest smile Elizabeth had seen on his face for ages.
Did you notice at the beginning of chapter 2, Liz is running around school looking for Todd? The interaction she has with Ken Matthews?
Oh my God, yes! I can't believe we would be remiss if we didn't talk about this.
Yeah, so Ken Matthews, of course, quarterback, football star, blonde, kind of friendly with everyone person.
Potentially dating Mrs. Dalton.
Potentially. Listen, he was homesick for a few days, so we'll never know.
Because we couldn't ask.
So he basically tells her, if you're looking for Todd, you'll find him in the parking lot with his new toy. Thanks, Ken, Elizabeth said, giving her favorite football player a squeeze on the arm. You're an angel.
That wasn't the interaction I was thinking of, because isn't there another interaction later where they also have kind of a weird flirtation, and she's like, leave me alone?
That wasn't him. That was Guy Chesney. So that's when Guy Chesney gives Liz a ride,
yeah,
I think to the Dairi Burger from school.
Where else would you go?
And Guy Chesney was weird with her. Like, he kept putting his arm on her and trying to flirt with her and stuff. Anyway.
What do you make of the Ken business?
Just the fact that she gave him a squeeze on an arm and said, "You're an angel." Did we need that? Like, is there a reason to include that? You know what I'm saying? Like, why couldn't she just find Todd? Like, so I'm just saying that happened. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. I'd like to think a little bit about Todd and the motorcycle and the ways in which, my favorite phrase, I think Todd is becoming a leather daddy. I think he came out as queer in an earlier book, and now he is leaning into kind of his S&M leather side. He's wearing helmets. He's wearing leather jackets. He says, "I can't believe how much dirt I picked up just riding to school. I'm going to have to spend all my spare time keeping this baby clean." He dropped his rag and gave Elizabeth a hug. How's my favorite motorcycle mama?
That was so weird.
For me, the way I read it, he doesn't have a script for being a heterosexual motorcycle man. So he says weird things like, "How's my favorite motorcycle mama?" For those of us within the queer community, there is another, more readily available motorcycle man script. That script, of course, is the Village People. He's becoming the leather guy of the Village People. That's it. That's the analysis.
That's funny.
It's also true.
Yeah.
That's why it's so funny.
Well, it's like the mustache with Scott Daniels. We learned, of course, it could have been a symbol in gay community after Freddie Mercury at the time, or it could have been Burt Reynolds. And this is why we have to look at co-occurring signs. So, okay.
Motorcycle mama to me was so jarring. Like, that is such an unsexy way to think and talk.
Yeah, it was really
Because he doesn't know how to be sexy with a woman. Because what would you say if you were talking to a man instead of motorcycle mama? What might you say, Pardo?
Don't make me do this.
Why? What would you say?
Motorcycle daddy.
You would say motorcycle daddy. And that sounds fine. That sounds sexy. Strap me on and sign me up.
So what, motorcycle mommy? What
No,
should
I
it
think motorcycle, there's nothing there. I think
All right.
he's just trying to make it work and it doesn't because he's trapped.
What he should have
inside-
said was virago. That's what he's trying to
Exactly.
say. Can we talk about Enid in this book? I thought because
Oh
you
my gosh.
historically are fascinated with Enid, her
I
hotness.
remain fascinated with Enid.
So I think here we got a little more about what's going on with Enid, right? So I think we got the first description of her from the perspective of Liz. Liz, I think, sees her walking to school or something. It's like she's holding her books and she's kind of looking slightly down, and Liz is thinking, "Oh, I wish she had more confidence," or something, or "I wish other people could see the Enid I see." And then we also are learning about a little bit more about Enid and her relationship with her mother, with the mother's planning of the Sweet 16. So pretty much what happens is Enid seems a bit frustrated, a bit put out, a bit annoyed by her mother's, what she sees as too much effort around Enid's Sweet 16 party, and she's making her get engraved or hard copy printed invitations, and Enid thinks it's so ridiculous and everything. And Liz, tries to say to her, "Well, your mom cares about you and she thinks it's special." And Enid's like, "Well, maybe it's for her." And then Enid kind of comes around later. Did you make anything of this?
One thing I thought was kind of interesting was that Enid's mom is being like a Sweet 16 Zilla. She's like taking over in kind of a mother of the bride situation.
But like, is she being a Zilla or Enid? Like, what evidence do we have that she's actually being Zilla?
Oh, for me, she seems
Like I thought it was more Enid's kind of being a brat.
Oh, I did not. I mean, I'm famously an Enid sympathizer. I think she's been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. I think she's prettier than we're ever allowed to believe, etc. I just kind of took it at face value that like Enid wants to have a small, reasonable Sweet 16 party. For me, the way I was reading it, I felt like Enid's mom pictures Enid being this popular, pretty, let's say Jessica Wakefield type who wants a big party that invites everyone. And that's not Enid. And so Enid's mom is having to reconcile, or should have to reconcile, but isn't, the difference or the disparity between the daughter she wants to have and the daughter she has. But instead of doing that, she's forcing Enid to have the kind of Sweet 16 she doesn't want. Thoughts?
I hear you. I see it just slightly different. I don't know that it's that the mom thinks she's more popular or is trying to invite more people. I think it's more that the mom is putting more effort and making it fancier. So she sent invitations. Enid says she might have caviar instead of pigs in blankets. So she's trying to make it more upscale, which, she says, "My mom's going wacko over this." I could see that being a little bit extreme maybe on the mother's part, but it doesn't feel that big to me necessarily what the mom's doing. She's kind of just being like, let's get fancy food for this and let's get real invitations. Like, that's kind of all she really does. I think it's more, so maybe there's a little bit of it, but I saw more of Enid's resentment or like interpreting of what is sort of a benign thing and like celebrating her, you know. So I'm not saying it's Enid's wrong, anything like that. It's just showed me something about that maybe there's something going on with Enid there. Also, I thought, since you like to think about how Enid is kind of horny for Elizabeth, or we like to talk about that sometimes.
Always.
I thought you kind of would die at...
What chapter are you in? 1.
4.
Okay.
They're talking about the invitation. Todd says, what are these made of, silk? No, they're paper, Enid says. But they cost about as much as silk. Big waste of hard-earned money, if you ask me. Your mom thinks you're worth it, Elizabeth said, and so do I. Thanks, Liz. I feel the same way about you, Enid said, blushing. She cherished their friendship deeply and was glad to hear Elizabeth admit it, too. That felt weird to me.
Whoa! Admit it!
Yeah. So there's the admit it, there's the blushing, but it's also like, your mom thinks you're worth it, and so do I. Thanks, Liz. I feel the same way about you. Liz didn't say this is parsing, but thinking versus feeling. Like, all Liz is saying is, you're worth it. Have a great party. And Enid's like, I feel the same way about you. You know what I mean? I thought Collins's advice about envy and Elizabeth's whole journey, understanding the concept of envy, was really interesting. Like, one of the things Elizabeth struggles with in this book is irrational feelings and what to do with them. For example, like, she has her fear of the motorcycles, but she also believes it to be irrational in the sense that she understands in terms of statistics and so on and so forth. There's no reason to believe that every time Todd gets on a motorcycle, he's going to have an accident the same way that Rexy did. She understands that that is an emotional-based thing, and she's trying to figure out what to do with that. And then the other thing is the feeling of envy. And so when she sees Mandy, and I thought that was a really interesting reaction. I actually want to read it. So Todd shows up on his bike and ends up diffusing the fight between Crunch and Danny Stouffer. Todd handed Crunch his helmet as he jumped off the bike, but Elizabeth's attention was directed toward the person who got off the bike with him. It was Mandy Farmer, the girl who was saving the whales with Todd. Dig. As the tall, shapely girl took off the helmet she was wearing and let her long black hair wave in the breeze, Elizabeth began to shake. Mandy had been wearing a hot pink helmet, Elizabeth's helmet. Elizabeth tried hard to suppress the feelings of jealousy that now were welling up inside her. She knew she had no reason to feel this way, but she felt unnerved. So this thing of like what to do with feelings that are irrational is like a theme for her. And then later, you know, when Todd sees her in the car with Guy Chesney and he's sort of irritated about it, she has this realization because it makes her laugh, because she realizes, oh, there was so nothing going on between me and Guy Chesney that, like, if Todd could feel that way, there could so be nothing, and there so is nothing going on between him and these other girls, and like this is normal and we just have these feelings. And then they have a laugh and they sort of understand that. And Mr. Collins ends up giving her advice about envy, about how it's irrational and you just sort of have to accept it and that's okay or whatever. I don't know, I just thought it was interesting to see Elizabeth work through, how do I handle certain types of feelings that sort of go against what my brain tells me, and that's a very challenging thing for her because she's not used to that.
And it's a very developmentally appropriate, kind of moment that she's in. And like at the end of chapter 3, we kind of get some of that, where she's like, Elizabeth understood Jessica's anger, but Todd was right too. The bike could be looked at as simply a means of transportation, no more dangerous than the car in the right hands. Accidents happen to people who drove cars too, and she didn't go around worrying every time she saw a car go by. How could two of the people she loved the most both be right and both be on opposite sides? And where did that leave her? Like that same kind of moment of like, how do I make sense of all of this stuff? How do I kind of navigate this world in which the people that I turn to for advice are contradicting each other and both seem right? Feels like such a 16-year-old developmental kind of who am I, where am I, what am I going through? And it's interesting that she turns to a trusted, sexy advisor to be like, what do I do? And he actually gives her good advice and isn't gross, I don't think.
And then it's interesting that when her parents, you know, he talks to her parents and tells them all the safety stuff and they say, listen, we appreciate it, but no.
Yeah.
She feels relief. It's this complexity of there's the fact that she felt relief in that moment showed me, okay, some of this fear, she really does have this fear part of her.
Yeah.
And another part of her wants to do it and is thrilled by it ultimately and whatever, right? And so it is complicated. So I thought that was kind of done in a very delicate
Thoughtful.
way. Oh, I have to talk about something. So this is chapter 6. When she's talking to Todd at the Dairi Burger after getting there with Guy Chesney, what was that all about? Todd grumbled as the two of them went inside and approached the counter. Nothing, Elizabeth said before ordering the hot clam special and a root beer. Why are you ordering that? He whispered after ordering a cheeseburger and fries for himself. It's awful. I want to give it one more chance. Maybe it's improved. So Elizabeth got the clam special the first time.
Yes.
And was disgusted by it, and it tasted bitter.
It's bitter and it's heavy as a lead bullet.
And then she got it again. Now, I feel this is a metaphor for her masochistic nature.
Oh.
And that's all I want to say about that.
Can I just very, it's almost nothing, but just kind of supporting my motorcycle equals sex. There's a moment where he offers Enid a ride around the block in chapter 4, and he says, how about a ride? He says, motion the motorcycle behind him. You mean it? She asked. A quickie, just around the block. Like, I mean, come on.
It also, God, you're right. Because then it also explains why the whole question of does her not doing
how does
it
impact him?
mean he's going to do it with other people.
Right, exactly. That feels so high school. Like, it really viscerally
that's what it is. If
something.
she doesn't do it, is he going to do it with other people? Yeah.
Exactly. You kind of shockingly, in my mind, just glossed over. We talked about Ken Matthews. Ken Matthews' potential lover, Ms. Dalton.
Mm-hmm.
What is she doing? She's discussing the verb
Oh.
savoir in French.
Mm-hmm.
You want to take this? I mean, you are French. You're in a French speaking.
Okay, so savoir is to know.
Isn't it, though?
And what do we know in this world? You know, Ms. Dalton, don't shake your head at me. Let me keep talking. Don't tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm right. Ms. Dalton, we know, was rumored to be having an affair with Ken. But did we actually ever find out for certain? We heard rumors and speculations, but we never savoired for sure. You know, similarly in this book, we have Elizabeth trying to make sense of the rational, the emotional, the irrational. How can she know for sure if it's safe to go on the bike? Can you ever savoir something for sure?
So great. I was just thinking savoir, to know, knowledge of good and evil, biblical, Eve biting the apple, can't turn back, original sin. She gets on the back of a motorcycle and she's in a coma, right? But this idea that if the motorcycle is sex, is carnal knowledge.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, you're fine. And I mean, we call that the fall.
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, sorry. I'm screaming, so it's hard not to hear me.
Chapter 8, they're all going to the party, whatever. I just want to talk about Jessica's outfit, because I loved this. A black and white satin jumpsuit held in place by 2 tiny spaghetti straps. With her hair piled atop her head and long black and white earrings dangling from her lobes, Jessica looked stunning. I just like that.
The advice section with Collins did start with him putting his hands on her shoulders.
I know.
And just put a pin in that, because there's a lot of shoulder touching that's coming in the end of the novel. And you're going to tell me, oh, it's totally fine. And I'm going to tell you it is not.
I think we should go to when she gets on the bike.
Let's get on that bike. Well, actually, can we talk about him getting rid of it? I can't stand having to meet you places, and I can't stand watching you go home with other people. Not to mention having to depend on that sister of yours. It just isn't worth it. We belong together, and if the backseat of the bike isn't your style, then it's up to me to make other arrangements. You mean you're doing it just for me? You're agreeing not to have sex just for me? But what about your dream? Dreams have a way of turning sour when they become real. It's funny, though. I'd wanted a motorcycle ever since I was old enough to know what one was. I worked hard for this baby. I don't have to tell you. It was supposed to be the best thing that ever happened to me. But you know what? Elizabeth drew back just far enough to see the tears in his eyes. What? She asked in a whisper. The best thing that ever happened to me is you.
No,
you mean more to me than any dumb piece of machinery. I couldn't stand the thought of losing you, and I couldn't see you tolerating this bike too much longer.
And this, I think, is Elizabeth and Todd making a mistake, like, in the sense that they're too codependent. Like, they need to just accept that, like, it's okay to see, and I know it's a metaphor for sex, but, like, just taking it on being also about the bike. They've established that she's not with Guy Chesney. He has nothing to worry about. They've established that he's not interested in anyone but her. She has nothing to worry about. Even him saying, I won't take other girls on it, I think is a pretty extreme concession. And then so for him to be like, and I won't even have it for myself when it's been his dream since a child, like, that isn't a good thing in a relationship, that, like, if it's that huge for him, he's not going to have it just because, like...
It feels like, to me, if it were something like woodworking, And she's like, I'm worried you're going to cut your hands with the saw. And he's like, well, that doesn't really happen. But like, this is literally putting his life in danger every time he straps that hog betwixt his thighs.
Well, I don't know the statistics.
They're not good. I
mean,
think.
If you take these books as an example, they're definitely not good. But
yeah, right? It's like, we hear about it twice. It happens twice. I mean, but I feel like there is a space within a healthy relationship to be like, I can see that what I'm doing is upsetting
Fine.
you. It is not worth it.
Fine.
I thought this was really sweet, but also I am deeply codependent.
I also just hate Todd.
We got to get on that hog.
All right. So he says, I promised your parents I wouldn't let you on the bike. I don't have your helmet. She says, I want to do it just once before you sell the bike. I want to feel what it's like to ride with you.
Sorry.
But what about the promise you made to your parents? They'll never have to know. You really want to do this? He says. Yes, she exclaimed. Todd began to smile. His fondest wish was finally coming true. Maybe it would only be this one ride, but he was going to do his best to make it an experience Elizabeth never forgot. It's going to be great, Liz, he said. Todd straddled the motorcycle and steadied it with his legs. I want this thing to be perfectly level when you get on it. The first few seconds were the most frightening moments Elizabeth had ever experienced, even scarier than her first ride on the giant roller coaster at Magic Mountain. Trying hard to keep from shaking, she hung onto Todd for dear life, every muscle in her body tight as a drum. When Todd began to lean the bike first to the left, then to the right as they wound down the road from the country club, Elizabeth closed her eyes and held her breath, certain she was going to fall at any moment. She was beginning to regret having been so insistent about taking this ride. But after they negotiated the curves and had begun the straight descent towards town, she opened her eyes again. She started to relax and enjoy the ride. By the time they came to the next curve, she felt comfortable enough to lean into the turns with Todd, their bodies swaying together with the machine to create one streamlined entity.
Ew.
When they completed those turns successfully, Elizabeth felt remarkably exhilarated, as if she'd conquered Mount Everest. Then she smoked a cigarette. Just kidding. Even at his careful speed, the evening air tickled her bare skin, tossed her long hair every which way. Her hands clasped tightly around Todd. She rested her cheek on his back and listened to her heart beat more loudly than anything around her. She relished the sensation of flying through the fresh night air. She finally realized what Todd was talking about when he referred to the thrill of being surrounded by the elements. She didn't want the ride to end.
I mean, they fucking. Or whatever.
So, Jessica, okay, now with Enid's cousin Brian, because she ditched Stouffer, has a premonition. She realizes she forgot to get Liz. He says, it's already been an hour. I'm sure she assumes you're not coming. She found some other way. And Jessica has her twin instinct that something's wrong.
Just so that she closed her eyes and imagined that she and Todd were one person now, alone in space, whizzing through the wind. Nothing could stop them now. Nothing. Next chapter, it was a fine time to think about Elizabeth. Her body pressed tightly against Brian's. Jessica was caught in the ecstasy of one of the most thrilling kisses she ever experienced when a picture of her sister entered her mind.
So we don't actually see the collision from Elizabeth's perspective? Like, we don't see, suddenly there was a flash and a this and a that? That's interesting.
I think he describes it. Todd describes it at some point.
Okay, that's interesting, though. We don't actually see it.
But, the quick cut between Elizabeth's rapture and Jessica's rapture, and then Jessica's rapture being punctured with Elizabeth's, it's good for me.
Jessica has the twin instinct, something's wrong. She gets Brian to leave Miller's Point, and they see the flashing red bubble lights of the police cars. Looks like an accident.
Can I pause for just 1 second just to highlight? We have so much bad boy behavior, boys behaving badly behavior. I really appreciate the way that she's like, hey, I'm worried about my sister. We should go. And then he's like, I'm sure she's fine. And then she basically says, I'm sure you're right, but I feel better seeing for myself. We wouldn't have to stay. Oh, all right. It wouldn't be much fun with you worrying anyway. That's not the best behavior we've ever seen, but at least he doesn't trap her in the car and force her to stay, which is what any one of the other guys she had dated would do.
Mm-hmm.
So good for him. I mean, to be fair, he is a sophomore in college, so he's 4 years older.
Yeah, I guess good for him that he didn't assault her. Great.
Yeah.
She realizes it's Todd's bike. She gets out. At this point, she doesn't realize Elizabeth is there because she doesn't know that Elizabeth rode with him on the motorcycle, so she assumes Elizabeth left some other way. So she thinks just Todd's been in an accident.
Oh my God, this moment. Trying to fight down the feeling of dread within her, Jessica opened the car door and ran to the scene. But she was stopped by the firm hand of a female police officer. You can't go in there, the officer insisted. It's okay, Jessica heard someone say. She's her sister.
The words didn't register at first. From behind the police car came Todd, limping slightly, but otherwise appearing unhurt. Todd, thank God you're alive, Jessica cried, hugging him impulsively. Todd seemed not to notice. As tears streamed down his face, he said, his face cracking, I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. Jessica seized Elizabeth's body lying twisted and motionless on the hard pavement. Liz, Jessica screamed into the still night air. She ran as fast as she could. She was stopped by the paramedics. She's hysterical. They're giving Elizabeth oxygen, doing CPR. Oh God, is she going to die? Jessica wailed. Not if we can help it. You're going to have to calm down. I have to see her. She's going to be taken to the hospital.
To part the curtains for you a tiny bit, this whole book, I knew that obviously a motorcycle crash was going to happen. I never imagined that Elizabeth was going to be the one in trouble.
Wait, really?
And I want to be clear, listeners, it could not be foreshadowed more thoroughly. Like, it is 100% just me.
That's what, but that's amazing. And it actually makes total sense. Because you know how we were talking about how, like, it's so ambiguous and dangerous love or head for disaster. Like,
right.
It encompasses all those meanings. And you don't know from any of them that Elizabeth's going to be the one that gets hurt. I just thought you actually knew that from the next book, but you didn't. Because I thought we talked about it, but you didn't.
No, so when they go, she's her sister, I literally dropped the book.
Oh my
God. If anybody else has read this, like, I shouldn't have. You had kind of, I knew, but I didn't know until I think I just didn't want it to be happening.
No, you wouldn't know. You wouldn't know.
It was truly shocking. And you're being very generous to me because, I mean, you would know. She gets on the bike one time.
But as again, because of the sort of pacing of it, it's like, you think the problem is, you could think the problem is it's going to fuck up the relationship and like maybe there's going to be an accident, but because they all sort of quote unquote did the right thing, like she was honest with him, she told the thing, they worked out their jealousy, he said, okay, I'm going to sell the bike, and she this whole time has been grappling with, well, is it actually dangerous? Is it safe? And she ultimately decides, you know what, let's do it once. She has a great time, experiences it. It's like, that could be a resolve for that. So, yeesh.
Yeah, it was just really, it was hard for, I'm not going to mince words here. It was hard.
Did you cry?
I didn't cry. No.
Okay. Well, and that is going to, I think, bring us to SVH ICU. All right. So they get to, of course, Joshua Fowler Memorial Hospital. I'm sure you clocked that.
Did we Google who Joshua Fowler is? Is Joshua Fowler? Oh, Lila's dad?
The Fowlers. Lila's dad.
Okay. Wait, is he dead?
No. I don't know why it's called Memorial. I don't know.
Maybe it was already called Memorial Hospital and they didn't want to change all of the name, and so he bought it. I don't know.
Okay. Elizabeth's in a coma at the hospital. The parents show up. Everyone, they're waiting for her, and they say, the doctors, they don't know how long she's going to be in the coma. The next 24 hours are critical. Her vital signs are steady. She has a concussion and a few gashes on her legs, but she doesn't appear to have any major injuries. We're doing some tests now to see if we can measure the extent of the brain damage. Okay? My main thing that I was trying to understand through this was, what are her actual injuries? Because for her to be in a coma, and I did Google it. I did Google this because I'm not a doctor. And
sorry?
I'm a doctor. I'm a doctor of philosophy. So because here's the thing. In order for you to go into a coma,
God forbid, patooey.
And I Googled it. You have to have had a traumatic brain injury.
TBI is what we call them in the industry, yes.
Okay, and so I am looking at this thinking, okay, they're doing tests. So they're doing brain scans, they're doing CT scans, this type of thing, right? Mm-hmm. To understand what's going on in the brain. Then later, they say there's no brain damage. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that's possible. There is brain damage that could recover. But from what I Googled, that doesn't make sense. Yeah, she would be in a coma and not have had any brain damage. I don't think that's actually possible. Because I Googled, can you have traumatic brain injury and not damage? And it says, no, it does damage. It's just different types of damage.
Yeah. I was confused about the visiting policy at the hospital. So I'm confused about her injuries and the extent to which they are, like, it feels very soap opera that she's like got a couple of scratches and bruises and is in a coma.
We saw a side to Jessica here that I wondered if you were interested in, just in terms of her guilt, her remorse, and her just love for Elizabeth. I don't know if that you were touched by any of this.
I guess I wasn't surprised. I mean, her twin sister's in a coma. Yeah, I wasn't surprised. Do you have a passage in particular that you're like, wow, this is really surprising?
It was a gentle moment that Jessica had with Todd when she said, I overheard the doctor say that the longer she stays like this, the worse her chances will be. She'll pull through. Todd took a chair and sat across from Jessica. She's got to. Jessica shifted her haunted eyes away from Elizabeth to Todd. You still think it's your fault, don't you? I shouldn't have taken her, especially without a helmet. I should have known there'd be some drunken jerk on the road on a Saturday night. If it hadn't been Crunch, it could easily have been someone else. By the way, that's what happened. It was Crunch was responsible. He was driving on the wrong side of the street drunk. When I first saw her lying on the road, I was ready to kill you, Jessica confessed. All I could think was that it was Rexy all over again. But as I sat there last night, I began to forget about that and see that I'm to blame too. I think I knew I was going to leave her stranded at the club when I left. And I didn't care. Some sister I am. Jess, Todd said gently, Liz knew you weren't going to pick her up. And then he says, you know, she had this urge to get on the bike and it was sort of her choice. But that was interesting for me, especially Jessica saying, I think I knew I was going to leave her stranded at the club when I left. Like, that's a really vulnerable admission for her. Because, like, it's one thing to say it was my fault that I left her stranded. But for her to say, I think I knew I was going to do it, is really her saying, like, it's showing a part of herself that is sort of even uglier or even harder than maybe she needs. Like, that's deep. That's a deep reflection. And for her to share that with him, and I don't know, I was just touched by both of them being sort of gentle to each other in that moment, since they hate each other.
I was touched by that. I also just had this overwhelming, and maybe this is my, like, Elizabeth sympathizer moments. I just was like, no, it is y'all's fault. It isn't really her fault. You are both to blame. Like, yes, Jessica, you should have gotten back and picked her up. Yes, Todd, you should not have let her get on the bike. It is y'all's fault.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
I 100% couldn't feel more different. I'm almost in shock.
Am I denying Elizabeth agency in a way that's paternalistic and sexist, potentially?
Remember when we talked about Jess kind of stomping through the woods after being assaulted by Scott, and how she's like, Elizabeth should have not let me drop out of Girl Scouts because then I would have had some... And I said she was confusing cause and effect with culpability kind of thing. And we said the thing of like, yeah, of course, if Jessica would have gone to pick her up, she wouldn't have been stranded, she wouldn't have gone on the bike. Yeah, then in that sense, it's because of Jessica. Yes, of course, if Todd wouldn't have got her to the bike. And yeah, he is partially responsible for that, right? But she made a choice to engage in a risky behavior. She made a choice to get on a motorcycle without a helmet. That's something no one forced her to do.
I do see your point. I will just say, like,
and Todd didn't even Todd wasn't like pressuring her. He was like, are you sure? I promised your parents. I don't even have a helmet. I don't feel good about this. Like,
that he shouldn't have done it.
I agree, but it's not his fault.
It's hard for me to make, I mean,
what did he do wrong more than her? How could he be more fault than her? Like, she's at least as responsible as him. He didn't drive unsafely.
No. Famously.
He didn't cause the accident.
No.
And you know I hate Todd, so I'd love to blame him for stuff, but...
When they were both talking, I was like, yeah, Jessica, you did know that you weren't going to pick her up, and it's really fucked up that you didn't, and that you left her there.
But it's not any more fucked up than any of the other times she's done that, and it didn't result in a car accident. It's not more fucked up because of the outcome. It's just as fucked up as it always is. Like, I don't think that's fair to her. It's not her fault, like, what the outcome was. It's the same thing of, like, what we said. Like, yeah, if you invite me over to your house and I get in a car accident on the way... It's not your fault for inviting me over, even though it wouldn't have happened if you wouldn't have invited me.
I do think you're right. I think that I'm wrong. I just am having a hard time. As I was reading it, I think I just fell for the kind of fallacy that you're describing. But because I really was angry with them. But you know what? I was hurt and angry.
I think what this might show, what we can take from this is that, again, it's the complexity of... Because it wasn't like Todd was driving reckless or something, it is kind of this thing that Elizabeth's been grappling with of sometimes it's not clear if something is like safe or unsafe or right or wrong. And we take risks. And sometimes there are bad outcomes to those risks. It doesn't mean we were necessarily, I mean, in this case, it was, I think, probably the wrong thing to do. There was no helmet and whatever. But you know what I'm saying? Like sometimes bad things just happen to, and you have to grapple with that. And that's what they're all grappling with.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in the way that the ICU functions. Who's allowed to be there? Who's not allowed to be there? Who gets told information? Who doesn't get told information? There's this weird moment where Mr. Collins, of course, shows up with like 15 students. And it's just like, that's not how hospitals work.
Did you have anything to say about the way that like Stephen Wakefield?
Yes.
Okay.
He shows up, he spits at Todd. It should have been you there instead of her. And maybe I'm just reading this with my own kind of the rawness that I was experiencing, because I too was kind of shocked and horrified that it was Elizabeth and not Todd. But my thought was like, yeah, it should have been. So Collins shows up with like more than a dozen of the school friends. Weird. Then everybody leaves but Mr. Collins and says, your daughter's a very special person to me. I'd like to stay if you don't mind. Of course I don't mind. I know Elizabeth would like it. She's spoken about you often. It's just like very, that was very,
yeah, it's really weird.
And then he goes to get coffee and runs into Todd. You look like you need a friend, Mr. Collins said. When Todd didn't respond, he grabbed the boy around his
waist. That was weird.
What?
He grabbed Todd on the, and I was trying to picture it. Like they're at a vending machine or something. They're at a vending machine or something, right? I was trying to picture like what is, like I couldn't.
He says, come along with me. So he's like clearly pulling him in a different direction than he's going. But like I was picturing, and I'm sure this isn't it, like Collins is behind him and reaches around his waist from behind.
Mm-hmm.
And you know that's a lean waist. Not a lot to grab on there, very lean.
Do you want to go to the cliffhanger and Jessica and Todd holding hands? And
So Todd and Jessica fight for whose fault it is. I was talking to Mr. Collins, Todd said. He told me that when he was around our age, he had a friend who was in a coma. Apparently, it's very common to be in a coma in Sweet Valley. The kid was in the hospital for days, and Mr. Collins and another friend tried this thing to bring him back. It sounded silly when he explained it, and there's no guarantee it'll work, but I think it's worth trying. I don't care what it is. I'll try anything to get my sister back. Todd understood how deeply Jessica meant those words. He realized, perhaps more than anyone else, just how much of Jessica's spirit and soul were pinned to that bed. If Jessica lost Elizabeth, she wouldn't only lose a sister. She'd lose part of herself. Take her hand, he ordered. She did, very gently cupping it in hers. Now take mine. She extended her arm across the bed, and Todd grasped her cold, trembling fingers in his left hand. He gripped Elizabeth's fingers with his other hand. Squeeze, Todd said. Squeeze as hard as you can. She did as he asked. Now think of her as before. Think of how beautiful she looked last night and repeat it over and over. Wake up, Liz. Never before did Jessica wish as hard for something to come true. Believing in her heart that it was going to work, she did as Todd said and pleaded with her sister to wake up and join all the people who loved her and needed her. Yet Elizabeth remained unresponsive. Her eyes closed to the world around her. Will Elizabeth live or die? Find out in Sweet Valley High number 7, Dear Sister. Wow.
I mean, sometimes you've thought that the cliffhangers weren't enough of a cliffhanger. I mean, this is a cliffhanger.
Too much of a cliffhanger, overwhelming, very stressful. Book 7 is Dear Sister. So listeners, please tune in for our next episode. Anything else we need to say, or do we just play that outro?
Thanks for listening to Sweet Valley Hive, hosted by Robert Marks and Rebecca Pardo. For more, check out our Instagram at Sweet Valley Hive. Theme song by Yessie and artwork by Elliot Carroll.